Okay, so for this practice, I'm going to go over some supplies that I'll be using. I'm using Arches 100% cotton cold pressed paper. Now, why would you ask I would use Arches paper, a nice paper, on something like this? Because if you're going to be painting on this kind of paper, that's what you need to practice on, right? I'm just going to grab a simple brush. I'm going to use my Princeton Aqua Elite number 12. You can grab whatever brush works for you. I'm going to go over the paint. So like in every single workshop or retreat, I have like a little sheet here that I show everybody, and we start off just mixing greens. Because I mix my greens, I don't really, you can take some greens out of the tube, but I really like to mix them. And if you're stumped on the actual variation you can make from the various greens, well, this will help, right? So we have ultramarine blue deep with yellow, cadmium. I always use cadmium yellow deep, and I just mix them with the blues. So here we have peacock, Prussian, ultramarine blue deep, and cobalt. You can use more different blues if you want as well. And we also talk about the gradiated wash, flat wash, glazing, and how they come into play when you're doing shadows, etc. But just doing a basic, simple sphere, a circle here, and then how we do the shadows by using complementary colors. These are just basically most of the basics, right? And in with this mixing colors, you have the value scale, basically. How much water, how much pigment makes your actual greens darker or lighter, right? So with watercolor, it's the water you add to make it lighter. If acrylic and oil, you add the white to make it lighter. You add black to make it darker, or other colors. And here, you're just adding more concentrated color to make it darker. Hope this is making sense. So we're going to go over some of this right now. So here, I would start off by writing down, just grab a pencil. Of course, Ellen is not finding her pencil right in front of her face. Anyway. Just like write down that you're going to put yellow and peacock blue, right? Peacock blue. And people have asked me what's the equivalent of peacock with other brands. There isn't. I use holbein because I like holbein. Everyone has their preference. So I take a little swatch of yellow. Doesn't matter how much concentration of the water. Basically, if you want to try and grab it right out of the tube, I use two paints too, because you can activate them easier. Right, and I will do yellow and Prussian blue right here, and then yellow, ultramarine blue, put the yellow here, and I will do yellow and cobalt. Right, just get the little yellow. So then you clean up your brush, and then you add right out of the tube, activating my colors here. So the peacock is a very vibrant blue. There is no equivalent from Winsor Newton or Daniel Smith. It is what it is, and it's a color that I love. Just the Prussian blue. Now people go crazy about light fastness with Prussian blue. I always say, hey, if you want your paintings to outlive you for centuries, then don't use it. Use a different color that doesn't have light fastness. But I don't really care, because at that point, I'm gone. Whatever. Find a different blue. And then there's ultramarine blue deep right here. And then, of course, the cobalt, which I just took from the tube. It's a nice, bright, vibrant blue, great for skies. So now we're going to start from light to dark with a value. So here's my cadmium yellow deep, right? I'm going to add more water to it, very loose. So it's like consistency. This is everything in water control and everything in watercolor. Think of the actual product, tea. Keep adding more water. It's lighter. It's so thin. It's so watery. Now you just add a tap, right, of the peacock, which would make it very, very light. And you have this light chartreusey green. And you just tap off the excess on your paper towel, and you put that on your little section here. Add some more peacock blue, a little bit more cadmium yellow deep, right? Thicker paint. Gets a little thicker. You see, it's still vibrant paint. So like people who are saying, why my paint's muddy, it's the colors that you're using. and I'll show you why. We're gonna skip over Prussian blue and go ultramarine blue deep and show you why. Gonna add some more yellow again and more peacock, so it's getting a little thicker and a little darker. Get a little bit darker here. See? And again, I'll add more peacock. A little bit more yellow. Get even darker. See how this goes? And add more peacock. More yellow. Like really right out of the tube, basically. Even darker. And really right out of the tube, here's the peacock and the yellow. Look at that. The value scale. Now, depending on how much peacock you use and how much yellow you use, the color changes. You see? You can make a variety of greens just by doing that. So here's lots of yellow and a little bit of peacock. You got that chartreuse green, right? You add more yellow, it's basically yellow. Green, add more yellow. It's this bright yellowish, and even more yellow. You see how this goes? Now if you do the opposite, you're adding peacock, right? You get this color. You keep adding more peacock, you get that deeper green. Now we're going to keep adding more peacock. You see how it's getting darker, bluish green? More peacock, even darker. Even more peacock, blue. And even more. Gotta get this peacock blue over here. Just a teeny bit of yellow. And even more. You see? Now you take that same color that we mixed and you add more water, right? And that's how you're changing the value. See? I added water. That same color, I added water. And we get more water. You see how the values change? Tap it on my paper towel. Lighter. That's how you get all the different tones of the peacock with the yellow. The same thing if I added more yellow and I added more water, you would get that lighter color. And it's basically about adding the water, right, to get it lighter, changing the colorway by adding either more yellow or more blue, and all the varieties of greens, and there's more you can create from that. We're not going to go into like a 20 of them, but you can play with this. And then it might be helpful for you to write down, okay, I added a tap or two or whatever, just so until you get practice with colors. So what are my muddy colors? So here's the ultramarine blue deep, very lightly water, adding the yellow, and look at those two colors. They're not pretty by any means, but perfect if you want to do like that sagey kind of brush grass that you would see in like Oregon and the desert. So here I'm going to add more blue and more yellow, get a little bit deeper green. Look at that, getting thicker. More blue, more yellow. You see how this works? More blue, more yellow, get a little thicker, darker. More blue, thicker, right out of the tube. More yellow, get even darker. More blue. So this is like an even combination, 50-50. So you do, I would say the first row is like 50-50. And depending on how much water you use, I'm getting even darker still. There's the blue. There's the yellow, blue. Look at that. Almost like an olive green, right? And then you change these colors also, and these colors, by adding another color in there. You add a little burnt sienna, a little burnt umber, and changes again. So here, we'll take the yellow, mostly yellow, tap a little bit of ultramarine blue deep, right? So we'll tap. more yellow. See the green? It's just the same thing. The blue is just muted. That's just a teeny bit of ultramarine blue. Maybe adding a little bit more, adding a little bit more, and you're getting to these other colors back up to this section again. Now, if you reverse it, where you're adding more blue, you're going to get more of a bluish green. And if we water it down, we start with the light blue. We'll add more blue. We'll add more blue. You see how this goes? Just changes that color completely. And this is what you got to do with all of them. But that's a more muted green. And the thicker the paint, less water, you get the saturation. You see here? Right out of the tube. We call this butter. Right? Now you can either start off with adding a ton of water and a little bit of paint and going forward, or go backwards, have a ton of paint and dilute it with the water, right? So you want to, it's tea, consistency, coffee, milk, cream, and butter. The five, right? Now I've got 6 here, but you would say this is butter, this is cream, this is milk, and you can say this is tea and this is coffee. And just take out this guy. Maybe add like, but you can add variety all over the place. And this is what we do in my workshops and retreats in the beginning to get people used to mixing the greens. So here's the yellow with a little bit of Prussian blue. A little bit more yellow. Consistency is get a little thicker too as I add. More yellow, more blue. Getting into the thicker consistency. Thicker yellow, more blue. See how we're going here? And yellow, blue, right out there. So there's your tea, coffee, cream, milk, butter. That's Prussian blue, right? If you dilute it, see I made it thick, you dilute it with the water. Now you've taken that dark color right here and you've lightened it up. And if you add less water, again, get darker, even less water, darker. You see how this goes? Until it's almost, again, back into the thick butter stage back here. You can go backwards and forwards. And then the same thing by adding more or less one color. So here's the yellow, and I'm going to keep adding the blue. Then you can get these really cool colors that are deeper, right? More of a turquoisey or even blue. Now if I start to add more yellow, we go back in line again. You see? Forwards and backwards. And then changing the consistency of the paint with the water by diluting it. Just diluting it again. You get those light tones, you see? And you can make a nice chartreusey color with just this peacock, I'm sorry, the Prussian blue and the yellow. And dilute that again. So you get a really light green. And then of course, well, the last one is the cobalt. Now cobalt and ultramarine blue will make similar type of colors muted. These two will make really bright, intense colors, especially the peacock, right? So again, 50-50, here's the yellow, the cobalt. Look at that muted. Now I water it down a little bit to get that really light value. And I'll add the second one, which is deeper value. And I'm going to keep adding more paint, blue and yellow. And then deeper value, blue, yellow. You see how this works? And that is how you get your value scale. And again, depending on how much blue you add, now I can go back and add more blue. Water it down. See? Add more blue. And change the color of this green. More blue again. And more blue again. And more blue again. Changes the color blue. That doesn't look like the same blue, does it? It's kind of a nice, could be a nice ocean color. And then if you do the reverse, and by the way, you take that same blue and you water it down. Look at that pretty blue you have. You always think that you have to just water down the blue itself. No, you can add a yellow to it and you completely change it. And again, you're making it thicker and it changes the blue. Now, if we start to add the yellow to it, we have another color. More yellow to the same blue color. Look at that. More yellow. Look at that. And even more yellow. You get kind of a chartreuse color. It's just a different color. Now, I didn't talk about that on that sheet, but another mixing colors that I love to mix, and they're granulating colors. And what does that mean in context of watercolor? The colors, the pigments are heavy, so they fall down into the wonderful nooks and crannies of a cold pressed paper, which has got a lot of tooth to it and creates really cool textures. And that is ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And you can make 1,000 grays. So here's the blue watered down and the burnt sienna watered down. 50-50, I would say. Right, here's burnt sienna and blue. I should put the two colors on top, I'm sorry. Right out of the tube. Here's the ultramarine blue deep and the burnt sienna. Now, I did 50-50, I'll keep adding more pigment. Blue, burnt sienna. It's a little bit darker. Blue, burnt sienna, a little darker. Blue, burnt sienna. You see how this goes? Get darker gray. Blue and burnt sienna, even darker. Almost like black, right? Right out of the tube. Blue, burnt sienna, even darker. And really right out of the tube. There's the blue, burnt sienna. It's almost black. Look at that. And then you dilute that almost black color with water. And you have, keep adding more water, you know, it gets diluted. Keep adding more pigment. Now, adding more brown will change it too. So there's a lot of blue grays happening here. Here's the ultramarine blue deep and more burnt sienna. This gray is now more on the brown. More burnt sienna now. More brown, more burnt sienna. More brown, more burnt sienna. Diluted from this one. Vice versa. More blue becomes neutral again. More blue. More blue. More blue. So when I say I'm doing a shadow with those two colors and I'm adding more blue for a blue, more of a blue color gray, that's what I'm doing in my videos. But look how much you can get black. And I prefer the tones here, and I'm going to add some thicker burnt sienna, and I get that deeper brown. Blue and burnt sienna together. If you add more burnt sienna, you get a nice dark brown. See? Nice dark brown of the trees, more burnt sienna. Again, look at that. Nice deep brown. There's that bright red one, and there's a deep brown. These are the colors that I love to mix, because there's reasons. The various tones you get, the various colors you get, and it does help to keep your brush clean. If you're especially using yellow, my palette's a little messy, but these are more like, this is like, you know, this could be more of an olivey green, more of a blue green, and you get the really bright, vibrant greens. And depending on how much pigment you're using, instead of water, the intensity is clear, right? But you want the variety. You want the values happening. And it comes to play, and I'll show you how. So we could draw a sphere also. We draw two of them. Actually, I'm going to move this one over. Right? And before we do any of that kind of fun stuff, clean up my brush, let's just do simple techniques again, wet on wet watercolor. So here I'm just going to grab ultramarine blue deep. And now I talked about consistency, right? I got water on my paint. I'm adding more. A gradiated wash. You would start from like the tube paint, right here, right out of the tube. And put some paint. Clean up your brush, add some water. Clean up your brush, add some water. It should go down nicely if you're like leaning the paper on cold press. Right? So you can kind of move it, maneuver it, tilt it, and then you've got a nice gradiated wash. Starts from the dark. Mine might be a little bit more darker here. You can try and do it even slower. So here's the thick paint. Again, and diluting it with a little bit of water. I'll tap my brush with some water and tap on the paper towel, dilute it. Tap my brush, paper towel, dilute it. I'm tilting it, by the way. Tap my brush, paper towel, and diluting it. Right? That's a gradiated wash. And a cheat way is like I do with clouds. It's just to get it wet, not super wet. And grab your paint, sticker, and see if it tilts and goes down. And you can kind of dilute it too by cleaning off your brush, kind of just moving the paint while it's damp and it's wet, and you gotta move pretty fast. Alright, this is kind of a cheat way. Now it's kind of stopped a little bit here. We want it more of a gradiated wash. I'm gonna go back while it's really quickly. Just dilute it a little bit. Again, tapping back on the paper towel. And you can add a little bit more thicker paint up here. And you've got your gradiated wash. Kind of a couple ways to do it. Pulling it down, wet on wet. Now this might be a little bit harder. You might create some blooms. This might be a little bit easier as you kind of bloom. But then you also don't want it to be super saturated here. So how we do this on a sphere, right? Again, I would have this side be the darker side. So I would do wet, just damp it, get it a little damp, my sphere. Not super wet. I'm going to remove some of this water. I want it damp. And grab my paint. So there's the thick paint. Now we're going to have to kind of play with moving this paint. Cleaned off my brush. Cleaned it off again. Kind of just moving it, maneuvering it. We're kind of slowly blending it outward to get that gradiated wash. And tapping back on the paper towel. See, moving my brush back until we get that nice light color. You might have to go and manipulate some of the tones again. See, we don't want this half moon. I'm going to kind of play with moving the paint and blending it. And then just fixing this whole back end. And I'm going to go back and grab some more thicker paint. Just get that real back side darker. Now it's very wet still, and that's how you can easily blend it. I kind of do like the circular motion. I'm blending the paint. I'm going to move fast. And you get a nice, smooth, wonderful, gradiated wash / showing the sphere how it's supposed to look. Now we'll do that in my class. I do the same thing on both sides. If you do wet on dry, it might help just to tilt this going this way. Remember, we grab the thick paint. Now I'm going to clean up my brush. Grab that damp paint. Sorry, wet brush, damp. Again, clean up my brush, and I'm kind of manipulating it, you see, with my brush. Now what I've noticed right here is that it might happen to you, it's just really dark on the edge and then not really blended more. So I might go back and add some paint so it doesn't look like an outline. You don't want it to have it look like an outline. You want to have a nice blended bleed. This is wet on dry. And now I've gone back and again, just a damp brush, blending, tapping back on a paper towel. And if I want to go back and add some more paint, I can still at this time. Blend, slowly blend. If it still looks like a half moon, just pick up some of that paint, flip it back, grab a little bit more paint on the bottom to make it look spherish. Now we've got that kind of darker color there. Again, clean up your brush, tap it on the paper towel, but still be kind of damp on your brush, and wiggling it like this and pushing it out and blending it, just barely touching the paper, and then you get that soft blend again. So I wait for this to dry and I put an orange color right on top. That's glazing, and that's how you get the value because they're complementary colors. Now remember our wonderful grays, we'll talk about that for a shadow. And the flat wash. So remember we mixed all it up. You want to take your paint. The consistency, don't make it super watery, it's going to be harder for you to maneuver, but a flat wash is basically a flat wash of color, obviously, saying flat wash. But don't outline the square. It might be better if you tilt your paper. You want to go from top to bottom or left to right. So see, top to bottom. Get a nice flat wash. Boom. Flat wash. What happens if you outline and do that? What happens is the outline becomes like a darker edge. Sometimes it does that and sometimes it doesn't, but most of the time it will. Especially if you're doing a large area, you don't want to do that. It's fine if it's a teeny little area. This is a small area, but a larger area, you'll notice that what happens is paint starts to dry here, and then you go to fill it in and you have an outline. You don't want an outline, you want a flat wash, just like this. It's all the same color, it's flat. Okay, so we'll let this dry and we'll put the glazing of the other color on top. Because orange is the opposite of blue, we'll make orange. We can make orange or we could buy orange. I have a brilliant orange color, which is by Holbein, and it is an intense, I'm gonna grab it for you, orange, very intense. But make it with cadmium yellow deep and cadmium red light, and it will be a nice pretty orange. Now right now it's thick, right? The consistency of the paint is thick, you can barely move it. I'm gonna add some water to it. We don't want it super thick. Add a little bit more red. For the glazing method, it's a thin layer of paint. If it's too thick, you can't really glaze on it. And then you're going to put that orange color right on top of your wonderful spear you did. And look at that shadow is already created. Wonderful, beautiful magic. Ta-da! Without minimal work, right? So you can either paint the orange first and then go and do that, or paint the blue first and then do it. Little trick. That's glazing. I love the brilliant orange color. That looks more like a yellow kind of color, but the brilliant orange is more intense. I don't want to put it on there now because it will just make a mess. But if I diluted this wonderful intense orange, when we talk about glazing, you can see you can glaze over that flat wash color. Glazing just changes the color. See that? One layer, one thin layer over the other layer. So if you glaze ultramarine blue deep, again, the same color you did here, on top of this, it will make it darker. So there's many ways to play with your watercolors that you probably didn't think about. And lastly, we'll talk about shadows with those wonderful two colors that I mixed for grays. So ultramarine blue deep and burnt sienna. And depending again how much burnt sienna you use and how much blue you use, it will change the color tone. And I like to have my shadows more on a blue kind of tone. Right? And if it's of a spear, you would start kind of like in the center and do like a little oval edge. And you've got your shadow. Now that's just a flat wash looking shadow. If you grab the two paints again, really thick, right? Remember we talked about this. I would tap, because you know in wet on wet now, right closer to the ball. And then you get the shadow here, but the more intense shadow closer to the ball. You see how this works? Again, took the shadow here. I start from the center and they go outward. I mean, depending on how your perspective is. We're not really doing that right now, but again, there's the ball, thicker color, right up close to the ball. And that is my basic one-on-one way that I teach people basic watercolors. It's water control. It's controlling the water. We have all kinds of other things going on, lifting, etc. Lifting in watercolor is what I talk about here. I just put a color down. I'll get a little thicker. My paint. There's another technique. You need to have a paper towel close by. So the paint is seeping through the paper. But you, oh my God, I painted over something and I wanted to keep it lighter or whiter. You take a good stiff brush. This is pretty stiff, or even a stiffer one. And you grab the paint like a mop. Tap it back in paper towel, clean it off your brush. You see? That's lifting. And you can create some really cool effects with this. And you can just lift the color. Slightly lift. Now when you're lifting when it's wet, it's a whole different animal than when it's dry. You'd have to kind of really scrape it up. It's a little bit easier, but then you can get these little blooms when it's wet. All that, and then of course, this wet on wet, which you did, wet on dry, the granulating color, and dry brushing is when the paint is right out of the tube, minimal water, and you get that nice granulated texture because you're just basically touching the surface of the paper. And here's the texture, which is great for rocks, or wood, or just even roads. Right? If I added the burnt sienna, get some nice color texture here. Wonderful. And if I put wet color here and I added salt, you get more texture. So if you're struggling with color mixing and water control, these are the exercises you need to do, and you need to do them on the good paper so that you know how to use the paper. If you use it on the crappy paper, it's not going to help you. So here's that wonderful blue orange. I didn't like that orangey color. I can go back in and play with adding in the bright, brilliant. See, glazing another layer. Very thin layer, but it changed the color of that completely. Right? This is a flat wash. I do another layer of that blue and it's going to make it darker. That's glazing. And we do a lot of glazing in watercolor. So I hope this was helpful for you if you're just starting out, or if you've been painting for a while and you're like, what's going on? Why am I not getting what I need to get? This is what you need to do. This is the basic one-on-one practice that I talk about. And all these things come into play when we're doing watercolor. I mentioned wet on wet briefly, but basically wet on wet is you get the paper wet. Mentioned it here. And then you go in and you tap in watercolor. Tap in, see? And it has all these cool effects, depending on how thick the paint is. You could do like those little spider moves, and that is wet on wet. And it helps you do some great washes, but it also can do some really cool effects at the same time. And wet on dry is self-explanatory. You wet paint on the dry paper. So let me know if this was helpful for you. Leave a comment below. But this is the basic one-on-one I do from all my workshops. My retreats, I go into more stuff because I have a longer time for those. But this is what I do, so people just get the basics of watercolors when we're going to paint things. when you're using the wet on wet, when you're using the wet on dry, when the value scale is saturated. This is the part we go into butter. We do butter at the end. You start off with your light tones, your mid tones, and then you go into the darker tones at the end. So if you're painting a scene, you know, you do a wash of a light color, you add the mid tones of like 80% of your painting, and then you add in some like really deep, intense, dark saturated color for the details. All right, guys, thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you have a fantastic day. And just practice doing these techniques, especially something like this with shadows. It really will help you in the long run. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.